understanding what is happening in West Papua when they hear my story. They probably imagined there would be a broke person, heartbroken, emotional person standing in front of them. Instead of that, they, having heard my story, that my people are killed with 1/3 of their population, more than 500,000, living in a rich country, but living as poorest citizens, discriminalized every day, still standing strong until today, proudly fighting for the right to live in their own country. Me here, standing in front of them, not a sad person, emotional, but a strong, confident indigenous West Papuan, telling them that they can do the same. And that is what I try to do, is just storytelling. I want people to know what is happening in West Papua while Indonesia is banning, for media for more than 57 years. It's up to citizens. When citizens know in Europe, for example, in Britain or in the US, Australia, know what is happening there, use their democratic right and voice to tell their political representatives to act in the name of humanity, in the name of international law, peace and justice.
Hello everyone, welcome back. First, a thank you to our new patrons, Floss Barnett-Howlett and Samantha Richer. If you want to get more involved with our community, do become a patron. We had our monthly video call at the weekend and it was really wonderful. You can be a patron with a donation size of your choice. Just click on community on our website for more information. Coming together with patrons gives us a chance to understand what information or specific parts of conversations have inspired connection, action, and deeper understanding. We also discuss what's been triggering and how the multiple perspectives shared on this show contradict and build on each other. It's our main way of communicating and being in dialogue together. So this show isn't about broadcasting, but about brave space of conversation and connection. We really love meeting you and getting to know you through this WhatsApp group and the video calls, and it brings the purpose of this show to life. Thank you also to new members of Presence Collective, which also supports my time in the making of this show. It's the community I've put together where we go through monthly themes that support you in embodying what is shared in this podcast. This month, we're exploring rituals for well-being, which connect you to yourself and to the earth. And next month, we'll work with eco-grief so that you're not consumed by fear and terror about the future. Also, to let you know, there is a discount this month for people of colour to join Presence Collective. So as a community, it is more representative, as many wellbeing spaces and activism circles are not. You can find out more about that on my Instagram, but the discount code to use is simply representation. To join Presence Collective, visit the courses page on our website. A big reason I started this show is that I didn't find anything that really spoke to the complexity that we live in and is female-led. I want to say a thank you to Mary Chan and Lucy White, our all-female diverse team, for their care and attention on each episode. We make this without any official backing or permission. We make it because it's important, and because despite being told we have short attention spans, so many of us are actually craving depth and need space for contemplation and awareness of perspectives that don't fit so easily into headlines. We want to offer these perspectives without a fear narrative, so that instead of it being overwhelming, you're empowered. Today's episode has come at a moment where it feels extra timely, given the violence in West Papua this week. I know many of you all over the world were at climate strikes last week and will be again tomorrow. The Wretched of the Earth wrote a very interesting collective speech, which I recommend reading in full. You can find it in our show notes. Here is an abbreviated version of what they shared. I want to acknowledge all those who continue to fight and exist on the front lines of climate violence today. You've all heard that our house is on fire, but for many of us, our house has been on fire for over 500 years, and it did not set itself on fire. We were thrust here by powerful forces that drove the unequal distribution of resources and the rigged structure of our societies. The economic system that dominates us was brought about by colonial projects whose sole purpose is the pursuit of domination and profit. For centuries, racism, sexism, and classism have been necessary for this system to be upheld and have shaped the conditions we find ourselves in. Our vision for a climate-just world cannot and will not repeat the same things that got us here in the first place. Instead, the solutions will be led by the deep knowledge that comes from the very communities who have long resisted colonialism and imperialism, and those who have the courage to embrace radical solidarity. That means getting rid of this extractivist mindset, which decides whose lives and existences matter, whose rivers, forests, and mountains are up for grabs, whose people's resources can be exploited and their land taken, and of course, whose lives can be taken when they resist. Our vision for a climate-just future will not be one of extraction, but of regeneration and care, because the same ideology of supremacy and the same mechanisms of extraction which have led us here in the first place will never bring about justice. There can be no climate justice without migrant and racial justice. We are living in dangerous times, and many in the global north are now waking up to the threat. And so we may feel desperate trying to reach for quick and easy solutions. But unless we start from a place of reflection, understanding, and deep solidarity, we may yet again see how urgency ends up looking a lot like colonialism and extractivism. Always, when we're looking for solutions, the first call should be to uplift the voices of those fighting in the front lines. We must defend Indigenous communities and their territories where they hold 80% of the world's biodiversity. Through natural climate solutions, they have trapped 30 times the global CO2 emissions in their territories, but still they are murdered, criminalized, and imprisoned by settler colonial governments and by extractive corporations. We could take enormous steps towards limiting climate breakdown merely by respecting Indigenous sovereignty. There is no one-size-fits-all set of solutions ready to use out of the bag, but we do have solutions ready. They require reparations and redistribution at an unprecedented scale, and a complete transformation of our economic and political system. All this may sound like too much, but it is not. There are many of us reimagining the worlds we need to thrive. At the end of the day, the fight for climate justice is the fight of our lives, and we need to do it right. This week's episode is about exactly that. People who are resisting, who embrace radical solidarity, and who simply want to live in their Indigenous ways, free to express their culture and protect their rainforest, and not live in constant fear of violence, brutality, and genocide. And then despite that, the West Papuans that I have met are courageous, joyful in their hearts, and determined. This episode is dedicated to all who are on the front lines of this injustice, and those who are grieving loss this week and over the past 60 years. One aspect of the uncertainty I have learned about recently is that the Indonesian officials will tell Papuans that they are safe in other parts of Indonesia, and then still police and officials will turn up to the student dorms in the middle of the night to incite fear. They are told they don't have to go back to West Papua, but also harassed daily. Many have gone back over the past weeks, and more violence has kicked off inside West Papua too, where at a protest this week, at least 26 have been killed and over 70 injured, including civilians, women and children. I have been told historic stories of West Papuans being told they were safe and then murdered. It's difficult to find any reporting of this past violence in the media though. When people live in this kind of oppression, it becomes normalized. Most of the time they get on with their daily lives, cooking for their family, earning a living, doing what they can. And then sometimes the violence and the fear escalates like this moment. It's hard for many of us to imagine what it's like to live in such oppression and yet still feel that you need to keep fighting for your freedom. My guest today is Raki Ap, who is currently working as a civil servant at the Ministry of the Interior in the Netherlands, where he fled with his mother and 3 brothers after the murder of his father, Arnold Ap. He is known as an all-round activist who is committed to political rights, human rights, and climate activism, because in West Papua all 3 elements have common ground. Raki has entered the Dutch army because he wanted to contribute to international peace and security, and it gave a good foundation to his turbulent youth, as well as discipline, knowledge, and experience, which he's used for the storytelling campaign in the past 10 years. In the Netherlands, Raki gives the climate debate a more Indigenous perspective, because in order to solve climate change in only 11 years, we don't have to turn around the facts, but to point out what needs to be raised. West Papua is a story that includes all these elements, and Raki tells this story with passion so that we can inspire each other to win the important battle and create climate justice. When we finished this conversation, Raki said to me that he wanted to inspire people to think about their lives and what they can contribute, and then to act, and also talked about the importance of contacting politicians and asking them to get involved in this and signing petitions. You may not know this, but this project was originally called Think, Act, Vote when I started it in 2010, and it feels like this is the key to the possibility of a beautiful future. I hope that you're inspired and activated by this conversation. Please see the show notes on our website for how to get more involved. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. It's time for us to move beyond silos and into an integrated way of being. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. This is the revolution. Despite the challenges we face as a global community or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. Raki Ap, it's such a pleasure to have you here on The Future is Beautiful. You and I met last year at the first Rebellion Day for Extinction Rebellion, and you were part of this global witness group that were going to every bridge in London that was closed down by Extinction Rebellion, sharing how climate breakdown is already affecting many people around the world. And it was quite hilarious for me because I was just there because there was Urdu, this Mongolian shaman, who is an incredible woman that I'd had the pleasure of meeting earlier that summer. And I had just sort of ended up coming to say hi to her.
Yeah.
And then somehow it was like, oh, you could speak for India. Yeah, without any planning, did share a few words of how climate breakdown is affecting India, and also how the relationship between the British and the Indians, and where the seeds of some of the issues that we are in now were sown, and maybe what we could really do if we, I never know who we is, but maybe we as Britain could lead something with all the resources that we have. Doesn't feel like we have that actual capacity given the current British political situation. But yeah, I really, really enjoyed hearing you speak. And also for me, it made me aware that although I have been traveling to Indonesia and spending time in Bali mostly, and that I did know about the situation in West Papua, but I didn't know a lot, which seems to be kind of how it's been designed. So that most people don't actually really have any idea what's happening. So I would love if you could start by just giving us a little bit of context.
Yeah. First of all, Amisha, thank you for having me on your show. Really a pleasure and an honor to get the opportunity to tell my story about why I joined the Exterion first Extinction Rebellion event in London. And it goes back to my homeland, to my roots. Now I live as political refugee, as exile in the Hague, Netherlands, but it all started in West Papua. So, for the audience who never heard about West Papua, so I will bring you it pointed on the world map. It is the New Guinea island right above Australia, and it is the western half where we are talking about now. So it's the western half, which now unfortunately belong to Indonesia. And since colonization started from like 1800, it were the Portuguese, the Spanish, and the English who arrived at New Guinea Island, and also the Dutch arrived there. And it was actually the Kingdom of the Netherlands who claimed the first part of the island of New Guinea, which was the western half, and later the British and the German colonized the eastern half, which we know today as Papua New Guinea, and which got their independence in 1975. So the eastern part of the island of New Guinea is Papua New Guinea as we know today, and it is an independent country. But the western half, which belongs to the Dutch until the 1961, today, unfortunately, was handed over to the Indonesia we know today. And the reason about what we see today in West Papua lies in the root causes of colonization of West Papua in the first place by the Netherlands. And when it was transferred, so-called transferred in 1962 by signing an agreement with the Indonesian government without the consultation of any West Papuans while they were deciding about their future. That was like the fundamental problem of all the root causes we see today. So people must understand that, West Papua was handed over from one colonizer to another one, as we know today as Indonesia. To understand the sentiment of what we see in West Papua, all this protest, we must understand, that the West Papuan was not given a fair referendum as was planned and supervised by the United Nations, because with the signing of the agreement between the Netherlands and Indonesia in 1962, there was an article which said that the indigenous West Papuans could decide via a referendum whether they want to be part of Indonesia or not. And that referendum took place in 1969. And we know it as the act of free choice, but it was everything except free, because instead of a one man, one vote principle, the Indonesia military and government elected 1,026 men who had to vote on gunpoint, on intimidation and threat of their lives and their families' life to choose being part of Indonesia. That was the referendum. So this is the underlying problem and sentiment we see in West Papua. And since then, a new colonizer took over our country, killing all these indigenous peoples. NGOs are estimating about 500,000 victims since Indonesia took over country. That's 1/3 of our population.
Wow.
So besides that, the world must know that West Papua is not a poor country. We have world biggest gold mine, third largest copper mine, BP's operating gas fields, and we have a lot of other resources. So the sentiment we see today is like indigenous peoples living as prisoners in their own country, colonized by another ethnic race, stealing their resources, killing the people, and marginalizing them in their own land on a daily basis. So yes, this is very sad. And knowing this, we also know that Indonesia have banned foreign media from entering West Papua to do the report since they occupy West Papua, and that is why not a lot of people know what is happening in West Papua until today, and that's very sad. And that's why I'm very active as R1 activist, as the most people know me nowadays, because first of all, my priority is campaigning for the right of self-determination for the people of West Papua, which was hijacked by Indonesia via the so-called act of free choice referendum under intimidation. So it is a matter of international law, and it's a matter of moral responsibility of mostly Western countries who look away, and even the United Nations who facilitated and observed this so-called act of free choice. So this is an international scandal where a lot of countries were involved. And that is that is probably why they want to keep this a secret, because when the world knows, they should take responsibility and return this. And that is the complexity and sensitivity from their point of view. The West Papuans are daily faced with racism, discrimination, intimidation, violence by these Indonesian so-called security forces. And it's now, shown into all this fury and protest all across West Papua.
Can you share what's been happening over the last month or so? Because the situation has exploded a little bit.
Yeah, so what we have seen the last 3 weeks since August 17, which is Indonesia's Independence Day, West Papuan students in university in Surabaya, they were yelled with racial comments at the dormitory in Surabaya, Java, by bystanders and citizens on Surabaya, but also by the police forces and military forces, calling them names like a monkey, animal, go back to your country. And it was caught on video. And this video you went viral in Indonesia and also in West Papua. And that was like the spark of the mass protest we see since that racist incident, which it's not an incident because it's an institutional systematic problem organized by Indonesian government to let it happen. There's just a lack of impunity in West Papua, and this racist attitude is like more the norm in for the security forces. So when that video went viral on social media, we saw this, uprising, we could say, across, I think, more than 30 cities in West Papua, but also in Indonesia, in Jakarta, in front of the Indonesian palace. Students and activists, academics, all went to the street and saying, enough is enough. And what we can say about this uprising is the underlying sentiment of 57 years of colonization, of marginalization, of killings, of racism on a daily basis is the sentiment which we could describe as we see the protest now.
I can add some personal context to this as well. I met actually last year, shortly after I met you, I was in Bali and I was at an event that was very modern hippie about the feminine, the importance of the feminine. They were supporting an NGO based in Denpasar, the main city in Bali. And the NGO had invited a woman who was from West Papua and her daughter. And I walked into the room and I looked up, and over this balcony was this little 4-year-old girl, and she was smiling at me. And it was one of those like instant moments of connection where you're like, I know this person.
Yeah.
So I was sitting upstairs with my partner, and I said, I have to go and say hi to this little girl. Like, I can't explain why. And I walked over to the table where everyone from the NGO was sitting, and the mother said, look, and pointed up to me. And then the mother said, she really wants to play with you. And I said, yeah, I want to play with her too. And so we spent the night playing, and it was very sweet. She was running between me and her mother, and I went to go meet her mother and said, hi, introduced myself, and said I would, I'm planning to spend a lot more time here, and I would really love to stay connected to you two. And so we stayed connected, and they came to visit me and stay with me. Actually, she brought her sister and her son, who she'd had to send to, her sister was going back to work in Papua. So she'd had to send her son with her to go and live with her grandmother. By being friends with them, I learned a lot about how the racism and the discrimination takes place, even in Bali, which for Indonesia is particularly gentle. It's a very gentle energy in the way of life. And actually, I kind of noticed as well, because we brought the family to a dinner, and I noticed even there, there was this sense of you brought these black people from West Papua to this dinner. And so that was really interesting for me to see. And then the other thing that was interesting is that because she doesn't have a marriage license, because the father of the children left her, they weren't able to register for the government schools. So the only way that the girl could get an education is if it was private school. And how are they ever going to get the money for that?
Exactly.
And they were living between this sort of rent house, and there were lots of difficulties there with the landlord, and a hostel for West Papuans. But then there was also the issue, because obviously there's a 4-year-old girl. And so over time, I got to know them very well. And it sort of became one of those relationships where
children need more than one mother in this world, that's the traditional way. So we kind of created this relationship where, I became Mama Amisha, and after some time of getting to know them, I offered to pay for her school, because I felt as well, like, I'm spending time in Bali, and you give back if you can, but you give back in the way that feels, for me, like this is what sacred activism is. It's like you kind of let the world speak to you. And for me, this girl came up to me very clearly and was like, hi. And so for me, I was listening. Anyway, since August the 17th, they left WhatsApp because they felt unsafe with WhatsApp. Various things were happening. Some of her friends got arrested. They had officials and police coming to the dorms, coming to the rent house, and just a huge feeling of no safety. And it's literally like, I was just talking to them 2 months ago about this girl. I don't want to say their names, but really, like, we had made this commitment that I was paying for her school in Bali until she was 18. So there was no like plan to go back. And because of what's happening, there's a sense that they're not really safe in Denpasar, and they're not really safe if they go back to West Papua either. But the call was for the family to be together. So at the moment, the girl has gone back, and the mother is just waiting to get enough money to go back. And it really brought it home for me, this sense of unsafety and the lack of control and of what happens to you, and how a political moment really affects the lives of so many. And for me, as a personal kind of grieving, because I don't know now whether how easy it will be to connect, to keep in touch, to the internet shut down in Papua, and what that means. And of course, I'm not saying this to share like my personal pain. I'm just sharing this because the issue is really brought home for me, and just watching this family from afar try and navigate how to rebuild lives in this kind of scenario. Just how many times it was like, we're not safe here, we're not safe there, please pray for us.
Wow, yeah. Well, Amisha, I'm very glad you shared this story with me and the audience, because this is the only way, actually, when you get in contact with a Papuan yourself, in West Papua or in Indonesia, you will hear this kind of stories. You can feel the fear they fear every day, even now. And even now, when there's a media blackout, who's gonna watch what is happening there? But what you are, just explained with your as personal experience with, a Papua family. This is, the cry and the feeling we want to share with the world. Indonesia could do whatever they want the last 57 years, even, and the world didn't know. And they closed entire West Papua. So nobody knew and nobody cared about West Papua because they didn't know where it was and what is happening in West Papua. So these stories are very important, and I'm very glad you shared it with me, because, now as West Papua, I could say whatever I want as political revenue. I experience, it myself, but it is good when outsiders from West Papua, non-Papuans, could underline their experience with the West Papuan in Indonesia. And this is, my heart wants to cry, because this is how long does this have to, continues to go, and how long does the mostly Western governments allowing Indonesia to continue this behavior against indigenous West Papuans, but also against indigenous communities elsewhere in Indonesia. And that is, what I try to do, is just storytelling. I want people to know what is happening in West Papua, while Indonesia is banning, for media for more than 57 years. And now, because of this uprising of, West Papuans who are not feeling happy under Indonesia again, because of the daily base of racism, intimidation, and now they're cutting down the internet. So this is very worrying, and I hope more media coverage will be there, but it's up to citizens. When citizens know in Europe, for example, in Britain or in the US, Australia, know what is happening there, use the democratic right and voice to tell their political representatives to act in the name of humanity, in the name of international law, peace and justice, whatever. We cannot allow this happening at this time of the age.
So in terms of what we can do, that's what you would advise to write to our politicians?
Yeah, there's a lot what people can do, and I usually don't want to mention this is what you should do, but I just want to empower them that you as individual can make a change, be a strong voice, for those who are occupied. And just by, sharing a post on Facebook, follow the situation, email an MP, organize an event, join our campaign. So there are many things, and I want to allow people to find, the way they feel comfortable to being a voice, and it could be from their own background as lawyer or as activist or as writer, as musician to play music, as creating a song. So this is where our campaign foundation is based off, individuals who want to contribute via their own expertise or way they like to contribute. And that is, has changed actually what is happening in West Papua for the last 10 years, because awareness is really growing. And that is why West Papuans feel stronger to go to the streets, because 10, 20 years ago, there was no West Papuans who was, had the courage to protest. But as we see today, they see the awareness in the region, Pacific, but also in in UK, here in the Netherlands, that people are talking about West Papua, are shining a light on West Papua, and therefore they are finding the courage to protest, to show the Morning Star flag. So it is from importance that people follow the situation in West Papua, and with a small contribution, you will create a lot of change and support and hope for the people of West Papua.
Thank you for sharing, giving us some guide points. I'm curious as to how it feels to be from a nation that people don't know about, having grown up with that sort of sense of this sort of secrecy and this closed offness around the situation. I wonder how that's affected you.
Well, that's a very good question. And I should go back in time when I was, between 12 and 18. I actually felt sad and I was shy to talk about West Papua because nobody knew where it was, and they laugh about it. West Papua, does it exist? Is it a country? So that is very, as a young person, knowing that you fled your home country because of violence, because the Indonesian military killed my father, it is it was a very emotional time. So at the time, it made me think, what can I do? What can I do to climb out of this darkness, about this sadness, and start being a voice? So when I joined the Dutch military, I thought I could contribute to, international peace and justice, and therefore perhaps highlight the situation in West Papua. It actually made me more disappointed after I served a couple of years in the military, knowing that there's a political hypocrisy behind the so-called, international military operations. So after that, I tried to understand what is happening in West Papua. So I was eagerly, dig into all this history of West Papua, how it was integrated, how these human rights violations could occur in West Papua while the world was looking away. Even the Dutch government, as former colonized, how could they all ignore it? So, and doing that made me stronger. Every day I understand the root cause of the problem. I understand the attitude of, for example, the Dutch government, and the United Nations. I understand the complexity and sensitivity around our cause and why there was a media blackout. And I understand, that our mineral resources played an incredible role in this foreign policy of those certain governments. So this was a struggle of understanding the issue of West Papua, and that made me more confident about now. So now I understand the problem. So now I can, share people about how the situation in West Papua actually ended up in the way we see today. So understanding the problem made it possible for me to educate people in a wide way to understand what is happening in West Papua, and with that, I could tell them how they can contribute to create a change, and that is actually what I've done, tried to do the last 10 years, and we could say with a lot of success. So, from an emotional boy to a confident storyteller, activist I become today, is like a huge transition in my life. And that is with that experience, I want to try to inspire and empower young students in the Netherlands, young activists who are who want to contribute in their own very way. And I want to give them hope with our cause, because even we live in such an oppression without freedom, we, the indigenous West Papuans, have shown that we are very capable of organizing ourselves. And if you look at the uprising and what happened actually the years before, is that we have collected like 1.8 million signatures in secrecy, knowing that we live without freedom, in full oppression, with very little resources. And we have shown, this is like for me the example to inspire young activists here in the Netherlands, but also in the UK, that look, what we have done in occupied West Papua must be a hope for you, and a signal that living in a free country such as Britain or the Netherlands, with having all kind of resources, you are able to create change. If we can do that in West Papua, you can do that for sure here in the UK or in the Netherlands. So yeah, it made me a very confident storyteller to fight for the rights of the indigenous West Papuans. It keeps me busy every day.
Beautiful. And can you share with us, because you're exiled, right? So you can't actually go to West Papua and kind of be on the ground and experience what's happening now. Can you share what happened with your father and why you had to flee? And if there are lots of people that are exiled?
Okay, so let me start with the journey of my family. My father was Raki Ap. He was an anthropologist and a familiar musician in West Papua until today. In 1984, 4 months before I was born, April 1984, he was killed during his term in prison. And he was put in prison because his music inspired a lot of West Papuans. The music he made was about, the identity of the indigenous West Papuans, that it is very important for us as young generations to understand the culture and to give it to the next generation, because it is our culture and our Melanesian values which make us West Papuan. So that is where he writes his song about. And of course about the desire to live in a free country. And therefore Indonesia put him in prison because his music inspired a lot of West Papuans. So on April 1984, the Indonesian military created their own scenario where my father so-called fled, and then they shot him in the back. It was an excuse to shut him in the back. And it was 4 months before I was born, in August 18, 1984. So after we heard my father was murdered, my mother and three brothers, we fled to the neighboring country, Papua New Guinea. We entered there a refugee camp, and that was the place I was born. After that, as a child of 1 year, we fled to the Netherlands. That was the country I grew up. Today, I become, the activist to fight for the rights of the indigenous Papuans, because my father's story was just one of the many hundreds of thousands we know today.
Can you share more about your relationship as well with kind of rekindling your roots and the cultural heritage? When I met you, you were wearing your headdress, and it feels like you're very much embodying the culture, and also a little bit about what the culture is in general. What do West Papuans believe in, and how is the daily life?
Yeah, so the West Papuan are very connected with the nature, with the environment, but also spiritually connected with their ancestors. In West Papua, more than 250 tribes, and all tribes have a kind of their own way, to honor their ancestors, to honor their God. Where I'm from, the Biak Island, where my parents are from, is like, we have a God that we actually worship. And it was all before the time, the missionaries come to West Papua. The indigenous West Papuans, and these tribes, that still continues doing their thing. The connection with the nature is very strong, and also with the ancestors. And I think that is what West Papuans made West Papuans, the way that we live with nature as one, but also the honoring of our ancestors. Is, even when we are in the Netherlands, we can't letting this away. This is what my father has worked for, educating the Papuans that we should uphold our cultural values, making music together, the way we cook, like a ground oven, those things are like, these are very important values of what make us West Papua, indigenous West Papuans. So, and I think until today, this is what a lot of West Papuans wanted to be, being, expressing their cultures, the way of living in their own country. But now Indonesia is like not allowing us being, ourselves, playing our music, the way we want to dress. They are destroying all our cultural values. So that is a very worrying thing. And also our, our mother languages, which is more than 250 in West Papua. Indonesia want to ban these mother languages. That's very sad, because this is, this is destroying the cultural heritage, the spirit, the DNA of indigenous West Papuans. So therefore, when we are here in the Netherlands campaigning, I want to show the people, putting up my headdress and show them, this is a story. In West Papua, elderly people usually put this on, and if we have a wedding ceremony, we have different headdresses. We paint our bodies with all different signs, with all different symbols, with their own, meaning. So in the Netherlands, we want to show people that the way I look is part of the indigenous West Papuan culture. And it got a story, and it is from importance that we show the world that this belongs to indigenous West Papua. So they recognize this is part of West Papua. And therefore, when I go, for example, to the Extinction Rebellion, I put the headdress on so I can tell people what this means in West Papua, and that we have a strong connection with our culture, with music, with being together. And that is the story I always uphold close to me, I share with people.
Beautiful. Thank you. And how was that for you to come from, as you said, feeling shy about your background, your heritage, to being able to stand there in front of groups of people with your headdress and with that real pride in who you are? And I know as the daughter of immigrants myself, that I've had to go on a deep personal journey in order to reclaim the relationship with my heritage and my ancestry. And I wonder how that's been for you.
Oh, I think it's exactly the same. It was a hell of a journey for me, from, being shy, afraid to talk about where I'm from, because I was afraid that, people would laugh at me, because I knew very few about, what is happening in West Papua, why I actually fled. So that made me not talking about it. And it was the journey which, understanding what it means to be a West Papuan, what it means for West Papua to live in the country, what it means to be colonized. Understanding these important chapters made me stronger and confident in talking up. And when I understand this entire issue, that was the moment that said no. And now, I don't have to be shy. I must stand up and educate them. And that was the moment, which gives me pride and joy and confidence. And the more I did it, it gives me more joy, more pride. Actually, it is unhuman to not tell any person on earth who you are, and that is wrong. So when it's happened, something is wrong, and it's not you which is wrong. It's the people around you. When they're not accepting your story as who you are, it's their part. It's their problem. That's the problem, and not you're the problem. That is, but it's a journey to understand, the importance of knowing your roots and knowing the story, which lies, which belongs to your journey in life. Yeah.
Beautiful. It's funny that we're having some like technical difficulties with this like clicking noise and some other bits, and it actually seems to hold the story of West Papua somehow in it. Like, even though you're in the Netherlands and we're both on strong Wi-Fi, there's still some issue, and it's like, it's an invitation for our friends listening to listen deeper, even though it's not easy, which is actually what this whole thing is really about. You have to make an effort to connect and understand what's happening in West Papua and to taste the culture. And so, I just want to put that out there, because I feel that often what happens on this show is whatever we're talking about gets, or the shadow of what we're talking about somehow gets picked up in the in the actual recording. Wow. And so, for anyone that is like, oh, this is frustrating, like I just offer that invitation to listen through the frustration, and that almost that's put there as a barrier because we have to go deeper.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. Amisha, wow, I'm really enjoying this conversation actually. Yeah, I'm really relaxed, and like you're really sitting here in the room, so that's great.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, it's a real honor to be sitting here with you.
Hello, this is Amisha. We are just taking a little break from the conversation here. On behalf of myself and the team, I want to say thank you for being part of creating a beautiful future. We make this for you, so that we will all have the vision, wisdom, and activism we need at this time to weave a new narrative. Can you help us with this? You can do that by making a monthly donation to the podcast to cover our costs. Just the equivalent of a fair trade banana you might eat or a chai latte you might drink whilst you listen to this will make a huge difference to us. Head to www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community to become a monthly patron. And the other thing is to tell your friends about this podcast so they can tune in too. Send them a message or post on social media and let them know what you love about it. And whilst you're at it, leave us a review. And now, back to the conversation. Thank you for your loving beauty.
Okay, let's talk about climate breakdown and how kind of this relationship between climate, between human rights, between indigenous people, between the refugee crisis, like how it's all kind of encapsulated here. And you were saying that West Papua is the second biggest rainforest in the world after the Amazon. Is that right?
Absolutely. That's right. Yes. The reason I also became a climate activist, and from there, getting in contact with Extinction Rebellion, is because of West Papua is world's second largest rainforest, and therefore it is like world's second largest lung, which is relevant when we want to stop this climate breakdown. So aware of that, West Papua is housing world's largest gold mine, with the result that our rivers, the indigenous Papuans live from, is polluted by this toxic of this mining, but also because of the presence of huge palm oil companies in West Papua destroying all this ancient rainforest. That made me realize, but wait, I have a personal story. Before we here in the Netherlands, for example, talk about climate change, we were the people who were in the first place being hit by the effect of this greed corporations, which at the end result in the climate breakdown and climate crisis we know today. Before that, it is about the root causes of this climate crisis, which lies in colonialism, which lies in capitalism, which lies in racism, and it is all visible in West Papua. So that is where I thought I should join this climate change movement, but I should educate them at the same time to be aware how we should fight. And it is about understanding what brought us in the situation, and which is the ignorance of these big corporations who are only out for, economic benefits. those who will pay the price are, indigenous communities, for example, West Papua, but also in other places, are the most vulnerable people on the planet, are stolen, are killed, bringing us to a much bigger problem, which is the climate breakdown crisis. And therefore, I really contribute in this Extinction Rebellion movement and climate movement to put in the indigenous perspective, which I've experienced myself and my people are still experiencing until today. And that is what I think, I could inspire and young activists, students who want to contribute to fight this climate change, which we all should do actually. Everything is at stake, so we can't afford us actually to look away, because that means that our future generations of children won't have the same planet as we know today. So that is where I also want to contribute from our point of view as colonized country, as indigenous people who've been suffering for more than 57 years because of this greed attitude of these Western corporations.
Yeah, I feel like this is really coming into our mainstream kind of narrative and understanding at this time. And this morning I was reading about a Brazilian government official who's been working protecting indigenous tribes in the Amazon for a decade that was shot, murdered. This morning I was reading about the fires in Borneo. It's happening everywhere, and it's this obsession with this palm oil, which I'm pretty sure we don't need.
Yeah, exactly. It's so sad to read those messages, and that encourage me every day to contribute when I can, to mobilize, to inform and to activate people around me. I try to do that from my point of view, where we could really create change. And it is actually very simple if you look at the IPCC report of the United Nations. 5% of the world's population exists of indigenous peoples. And these 5% of indigenous peoples protected more than 80% of world's biodiversity. So my first solution would be safeguard these indigenous communities, safeguard their rights, and we could at least protect world's biodiversity, the forest they live in, to prevent a rapidly more climate change happening. So that is, I want to contribute in the Netherlands. When we can safeguard this indigenous right, we probably can safeguard this climate breakdown really happening. So that is what I try to contribute every day when I have time. Even, I have my family, I have 3 kids, I work full time, but I just can't let this go, because everything is at stake, and I hope people realize that.
I was at an event actually that UCL, the anthropology department of the university, had organized called Flourishing Diversity Summit. And we had over 50 indigenous leaders come and share stories from their parts of the world. And a lot of it was being translated as well. And for me, what really strikes me is the selfless dedication that the indigenous cultures, it seems to be kind of universal, no matter what the tribe is.
Yeah.
It's like we live on the land and we protect the land and we protect nature. And it's not, so that I can have a nice, comfortable time. It's like a real sense of the importance of nature. And to have such a small percentage of the global population protecting so much of the biodiversity and the rainforest, and therefore our oxygen and the cleanliness of our water, it really drives home to me how obsessed with comfort we've become in modern living, and how selfish we are.
Yeah, that's sadly true. I have no choice than acknowledge that's the reality we live in today, that people are living too comfortable, forgetting, actually what is happening now. The planet is burning, and if we won't change rapidly in 11 years, irreversible destruction of our planet will occur. imagine from billions years of life to just 12 years to stop irreversible. This I don't have the right word, but this is just unbelievable that mankind have brought us to this situation. But yeah, as you mentioned, when you connect with, no matter where it happened, with indigenous peoples, it is like instantly a connection between, from human to human. That is, my experiences. When I met an indigenous person I've never met, it's like instant, like, oh, you love nature too. Yeah, nature's your mother as well. Yes, mine too. Well, so what can we do together? It's instantly a click. And, this is the connection we have lost with each other in this so-called civilized society, modern society, where it's about having more, more, more. Well, what is more? It's about person to person, human to human, and that's what we need more. But that is getting less, and we want more of all those stuff which actually dividing us, bringing us to the edge of destruction, and that's very sad. But I'm optimistic, as I'm always am, educating with this brave young generation, committed indigenous communities, committed young activists, committed academics, committed scientists, that I believe we can create change. So that is the optimist voice I want to share out. We can create the change. We've did it in the past, ending slavery, bringing back women's rights. So we can do this too together.
Beautiful. Thank you for that rallying call and that reminder that as humans, we have unwritten the unthinkable so many times.
Yeah.
Of course, what we see is there are still issues. Human beings are complex, and getting to these ideal places are not easy, but we can at least turn the political, the institutional lines, so that threshold, that way of being is protected. And then through that, then we can work on the interpersonal, interrelational aspects. One thing actually I want to share, that Eunice, who is a female leader of the Guarani people in the Amazon, she was saying, like, reforest yourselves. We're talking about deforestation. Let's just reforest. And we can all do that in the comfort of our urban or very Western privileged lives, to make that relationship back with nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's beautiful spoken of that indigenous woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it says everything. It says everything. And that's true. We should reforest ourselves. No matter, you can start wherever you are. Starting small, but we should begin right now. I underline her message, absolutely.
And then we get the strength that they have. For me, when I've been in the presence of indigenous people who just, and by the design of this world, are activists and they're spiritual teachers and they're embodied earth. And you see this strength that despite genocide, despite being chased out, the rape that occurs to their women, all of these horrendous things, that they're able to just keep showing up and keep holding strong and keep offering forgiveness and an opening back to ourselves at the core of what's really possible in our humanity. And part of this strength comes from that connection to nature, and part of that ability to, reopen our hearts, to forgive people, to give another chance, to, because these changes can't happen if there's a good side and a bad side. Like, we need all humans to get on side of nature.
Absolutely.
And so then we have to keep being forgiving for those that have been causing harm, and for ourselves and the harm that we've been causing. And this is a sort of a slight nod to a previous episode, but all of us that eat crisps are very much on the bad side of this whole issue with palm oil and what's happening in the Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a constant reassessing, re-forgiving and reconnecting to nature. it just reminds me, I've just been like up a mountain, just sort of feeling that connection to the power of nature, and how it can really nurture the core of our strength, and we can become embodiments of the forests, of the rivers, of the mountains.
Wow, yes, very beautiful spoken. Absolutely agree. And I think, it's that connection with nature, where all these people are eager to want to show, stop hurting your mother. Stop hurting your mother, because that is what we're doing. And when you realize that you should embrace your mother, you can feel the love, you can feel the strength. And that is, what keeps us moving, because we will never leave our mother behind. And people have forgotten that what is all among us belongs to our mother, to our creation, is part of us. And that gives us, it gives us the strength every day to, continue this fight, despite killings, intimidation, rapes, whatever form of violence. We must protect our mother, and we want to connect with you, because that is where life should depends, goes about, each other and Mother Nature.
Beautiful. And from the work that you've been doing as an activist, is there something that you've seen that's really supported people in making this journey inside of themselves that you can share?
Yes, from my personal experience, I've inspired a lot of young activists, students, teachers, every person who actually listened to my story. Because, understanding what is happening in West Papua, when they hear my story, they probably imagined there would be a broke person, heartbroken, emotional person standing in front of them. Instead of that, they, having heard my story, that my people are killed with 1/3 of their population, more than 500,000, living in a rich country, but living as poorest citizens, discriminalized every day, still standing strong until today, proudly fighting for the right to live in their own country. Me here, standing in front of them, not a sad person, emotional, but a strong, confident indigenous West Papuan, telling them that they can do the same, make them really think. That having heard that what the West Papuans have done, living without freedom, in oppression, without very little resources, it makes them think that why is it not possible here in the Netherlands? And I'm glad I could offer that them, even with so much pain I have felt in my life. I could give them, that courage, that hope, that them doing the right thing for us all. And that is, I'm very glad I could give that to the people around me, create the change we all need, because I know that I need every single person around me to create the change in West Papua, but also in other parts of the world. And at the end, to safeguard our planet, we need every single person here. So I will continue telling them my story, and I hope it will inspire many, many more people to stand up, find the courage, and hold that hope and create that new perspective and optimism.
Beautiful. And to close, is there a story that you can share with us, either a traditional West Papuan story or a story of people that you know from West Papua that can give us some hope and some courage?
This is the story about our God. Mananakari is his name in Biak. He left us at a certain point, is the core of the story. It's like the center of the story is about the people in the village forgot him. They didn't believe him anymore. They laugh at him. What I'm seeing now happening in the societies, we are looking away from Mother Earth, breaking her down, laughing at her, and then our God disappeared. He walked away into the fire. But at a certain point, so when people think about him again, that is the story of our God. we embrace him again. We mention him. We love him. He will come back to us. And that is what happened in West Papua. And when we reach to that point, which must happen right now, we must think again of who we are and who Mother Earth is. Then we can restore ourselves. And then our God will come back. And that is, how we stay connected and embrace our God. And then he will come back to the villages, come out of the fire, and be there for the people again. And I think this is the story I want to translate into the people here in Europe, in Britain, to think again the connection we had before, our ancestors had with nature. And we should restore that connection. We can come together where we were in the first place as civilization on planet, living side by side with nature as it should be. And I hope that moment will come. The moment must come, otherwise we will heading towards this extinction, and that would be very sad for us all.
Thank you, Raki. Is there anything that you'd like to share just in terms of links for if people want to get in touch with you or join some of the organizations that you're associated with?
Thank you. There will be a website, www.freewestpapua.org. People can find out all kinds of information of our campaign, of how they can get involved. Feel free to contact me, to ask for me. I am willing to, share more information for school, for events. And we have a social media channels, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. They can follow it as well, Free West Papua. So thank you. I want to thank your audience and Amisha, you for having me on the show, for this opportunity. And I want to close with believe in yourself as individual. You can really be a strong voice for yourself, and first for your family, for your community, and also for the people in the world.
Oh, thank you so much, Raki. And I also want to extend like a prayer that comes with action. So please take action, but also the power of our prayer to hold in our hearts the little girl that I told you about, and her mother and her family, and all the people of West Papua, wherever they are in the world, and extending that out as well to all of the unseen that are suffering that we don't know about or we don't have connection to. And there are many in every country all over the world who are being silenced and are being hidden. But even if we can't see them, we can feel them. And we extend, our prayer and our thoughts and our supportive energy to them.
Absolutely. Yes. Beautiful spoken. Thank you. I underline that. Absolutely. It really gives me the goosebumps when you said that. It's very true. So many people, and we must keep them in prayers. And, the spiritual connection with them is very important. So, I hope we really could, activate communities to look out for each other. The weather could be a very better place. And step by step, we will work on that from my point of view. Yes.
Beautiful. We're doing it together.
We do. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amisha. Thank you.
Thank you for spending your precious time with us. As always, you can find links to everything we mentioned in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible with you, our community. If you loved this and would like to fund our show with a monthly donation or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on Community and Support. Please also share with friends, hit subscribe, and leave us a review so we can grow. Those gold stars really help others find us, so these ideas can spread. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together. The Future is Beautiful is made by an all-female team working voluntarily or on reduced rates until our listener support grows. If you have been moved by anything you heard here, please donate the equivalent of buying us a drink. All donations make a huge difference to us and will allow us to keep doing this and remain advertising free. Until next time, I leave you with this question: how will you create beauty in the world?